Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Interlinked, the official Neo Tokyo podcast powered by Shrapnel.
Brace yourself for impact, crypto gamers. I am reporting from the sacrifice zone. STX3 just wrapped up and it was chock full of new features. One of those new features is the addition of weapon skin fragments. Scattered all over the map, in drawers, in boxes, on your dead opponents, there were weapon skin fragments that you could extract and then combine to create new weapon skins and bring those to the marketplace or strap them onto your favorite weapon and hop back into the sacrifice zone. They also added Metal, their off-chain point reward system, and some killer map updates. Can't wait to dive back into the Shadow Zone on June 24th for STX 3.1. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playa3ull Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, Playa3ull.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playa3ull. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked.
Today, we have the honor of speaking with Mr. Leo from Style Protocol. How you doing today, man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the pod. We do have the great fortune also of having the legendary co-host, Mr. Jared, Mr. Hogsheadcheese. How you doing today?
Doing great. Glad to be here, Leo. Thanks for coming.
Awesome. Cool, guys. So let's jump into it. Leo, we want to hear your story. We want to get some background on you and the project and style. Would love for you to just kind of take us back to the beginning. How did this come about? What's the origin story? What are the foundations of the things that you're working on? Keep in mind, we do have a full hour, so go into the long form. You don't need to be concise with the answers. Let's jam pack as much as we possibly can into the hour to make it super value packed.
All right, so short story long. Yeah, so about myself, maybe real quick. I'm in my late 20s, a serial entrepreneur, you would say. I started my first company out of university, which was like 7 years ago. I had 4 Web2 companies. 3 of them failed. One ended up being a small exit, which was the last company in Web2 before I moved to crypto. I bought my first ETH in 2020. So it's been around 4 years, 3.5, 4 years for me now in crypto. I started in crypto with a virtual fashion marketplace that was called Style Exchange. It worked well for a couple of weeks during the 21 hype cycle, where we sold virtual hoodies, virtual sneakers, very similar to Artifact. But what we did was we worked with like independent 3D designers and then had their drops every other week. Ultimately, that kind of came to a halt in terms of like sales and attention towards the end of 21, like most of the NFT and crypto stuff back then. And one of the things that really pissed me off a lot about not only what we were doing, but also about what a lot of other NFT projects were doing, was that one of the things that excited me about NFTs and Web3 when getting into the space was this premise of digital usability. And, back then there was this like term of like metaverse thrown around and whatnot. And I thought, okay, all of this is, this is really cool. And being able to have your like digital persona and your digital wardrobe, which was the reason why we started this like fashion NFT thing. But most of the premises were not held, and a lot of the things that people said back then would work didn't really work. Still does not work to this day, I would argue, on a lot of cases, unfortunately. And same for us. So we did some virtual fashion that was usable in like Decentraland and Sandbox, which was the big Web3 games back then, or the metaverses, if you will. And yeah, I thought there should be some kind of like solution in infrastructure or some kind of like access protocol layer, however you want to call it, for people to actually turn those virtual assets into cross metaverse, cross game usable in-game assets. I'm talking about real usability, not just like, and I'm not trying to throw any shade here, but a 2D NFT that's kind of like a card in a game wouldn't really fall under this category in my opinion. But like I'm talking about true like 3D usability in like virtual immersive worlds. Yeah, and I didn't see anyone doing this back then successfully. So we initiated Shrapnel, and what I'm describing is basically what we're trying to solve for infrastructure and this interoperability of the 3D assets and virtual in-game assets, whatever it is, whether it's wearables, avatars, whatnot. And this is how it kind of came about.
So maybe you can kind of dive a little bit deeper, because I think one of the absolute top tier wishes of anybody that you talk to in later 2021 in our space was interoperability. And I think everybody thought like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, if we could have, a sword in one game, that you could kill a monster in game A and you could somehow get something in game B and it was the same sword, or it looked cool, or you could use your PFP and go to all the different things. Like, maybe you could kind of talk us through like the history of the problem itself to really frame it for us, so we understand like what are the issues involved with interoperability that make it so difficult to bring from one game to the other, and then how are you really guys really tackling that, to make it better, I guess, or to solve the problem.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna start with the very last thing you said, the tackling or solving. How do we make it better? I would say that as of right now, there's no good solution in place at all to do this. Ours is not perfect yet either. There's a couple of competitors in the space, out of none of which has solved significantly better than us. There's different approaches. Um, so yes, 2022, a lot of people were asking for it. Surprisingly, the noise is a little bit less on this whole interoperability thing, which is unfortunate for us nowadays. But there's multiple issues or like multiple facets to the issue. If you want to move an asset from one world to another, there's basically three things to consider. The one is the game engine, just basically the software on which is running the game or the asset. The second is the stylized version of it in 3D. So just because you have something in 3D doesn't mean it's 3D. Example, everyone knows the sandbox or Minecraft. Minecraft might be even better as an example. Minecraft has a very like pixelated style of avatars and like worlds, whereas I don't know, Fortnite or Crisis or the Rockstar game engine is a lot more high poly. And for those that are not familiar with those terms, it's a lot more realistic in terms of the outcome 3D assets. So if you want to bridge an asset between those worlds, it's not only the initial game engine, but also the stylized 3D version itself, which falls under the same category of issue, but it's two different things. And then the third thing, but this only applies to on-chain games, you have the element of the blockchain. So you have potentially a game running on Polygon, you have a game running on Binance, something on, I don't know, Avalanche or Arbitrum. This out of the three is actually the least of the worries, because you can mint the, let's say, derivative or partner asset of one item that you have in world A into world B simply on this new chain. So this is actually not that big of a deal, and this is the way we're solving it. So we're technically not taking the asset from one world really to the other world and deleting it in the prior world, but we're basically making a copy so that it can be used in this world, which I would argue is the better way, because then you can still use the asset in the other world without there having to be transaction fees and without there having to be bridging time. And also, ultimately, if this is your asset and you have it in one world, you want to have it immediately in world B and at the same time. There's no issue with it technically being not the one of one, but just like a parallel. And this is kind of like how we're approaching. And gosh, there's so much to say on this. If you look at all these virtual worlds and the different games, there's also a couple of And please ping me if I'm drifting off here and this is not of relevance. But there's some.
Drift away.
Um,
Drift away.
okay,
We
so
love the drifting.
all right, so there's a couple of, how do you call them? Basically associations or loose get-together of groups trying to tackle this interoperability issue for the metaverse and gaming. One of which is there's a Metaverse Standards Forum. One of which is OMA Free, which is a um, one of the birth childs of this Aniwoka brands. And all of them are looking at it from a kind of like a community perspective, saying, okay, all of the games can come together and just discuss things, which is a good approach. But as always the case with some kind of like get-togethers, or it's not a political thing, but in this sense, kind of like a community governed thing, the decision making is very slow, and you have a lot of different stakeholders, and you have a lot of different opinions. And this is also the big issue with actual Web2 games, and the fact that interoperability is taking so long to take over in this industry, is because everyone has their own kind of like interest at heart, and it's not necessarily an aligned agenda to come up with some kind of like standardized file format, which is also what these different communities are doing. They're all trying to find a way in which there can be like a file format that works everywhere. So in 3D, most the common file formats are like GLB, FBX. There's probably a bunch of others. My head of 3D would be able to, or LeBoomington would be able to know this as well. There's a couple of other formats. And they're saying, okay, we can have like one super format, and then it fits into all this world, in all of these worlds. I don't think that's necessarily the best way to do it, and I think this is going to take a few more years to be actually developed or become a reality because of the issues that I've previously outlined. And now, if you have this in mind, there's two other ways to kind of like approach the problem. One is through a centralized entity that simply creates a format and then forces other people to kind of use it. This is what Ready Player Me is doing. Ready Player One is the movie, Ready Player Me is the company. Yeah, they have like, okay, centralized entity. We create some kind of like super 3D asset, and then we just say you can all use this. In theory, it's good, but in practicality, you have the issue now that the asset looks identical everywhere. So if you've ever tried Ready Player Me, they have like one asset, and it looks the same everywhere, and that kind of like it loosens this magic and this creative freedom of game engines and different game studios to create worlds that are inherently different in character and style. So last option then, from where we stand and the way we approach it with the Star Protocol, is having this through a decentralized kind of like mechanism, but kind of governed through one entity. So I guess it's a mix of those two, where we say, okay, we have this one entity that's kind of like governing the whole thing, but the decentralized approach is still that all of these different virtual worlds are connected via APIs, and the actual asset that moves across these different virtual worlds is adjusted in 3D file format and stylized character, depending on which world it is going to be applicable in. So maybe that sounds very complicated, and practically, or like metaphorically speaking, what I like to tell people is just think of it as a spider web that we're trying to build. And in a spider web, you have a lot of these different knots and points that are virtual worlds, and depending on where you have to go, the asset goes along the spider web and is basically created into the applicable file format and 3D stylized version of this world.
Let me just pause there and make
Mhm.
sure I'm understanding exactly what you're saying here. So basically, depending on what type of game engine or what chain, or if it's EVM, if it's Solana, if it's this, that, or the other thing, and then if it's like Unity, or if it's Unreal Engine, or if it's this other thing or whatever, depending on what the necessities of the actual game itself, where the asset is being put into, or the world itself where the asset is being put into, it will take like this core idea of what the actual item is, or what the the asset or the property is, and then it will kind of like translate it into, through a series of APIs and different metadata, into the proper format for it to be properly visually represented in the place where it's trying to go. Is that kind of a is that roughly correct, or where am I wrong?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And then depending on the virtual world that you're choosing, there's also a different way of inputting it into the player profile. So in some worlds, especially on the ones on chain, we can simply like airdrop it. In some others, we need the user ID to be able to send it to this person manually. So yeah, it's still pretty
So it's a difficult problem.
it's still pretty bumpy. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that's why it's a huge problem, right? Huge problems are not easy to solve, but
So I guess
that,
it
I mean, that's what makes them big problems, I guess.
I guess it comes down to at the end of the day, actually, not the aesthetic manifestation of the item itself. That seems like it's actually probably one of the easier pieces, but actually understanding what the core asset or what the core item really is, right? Like, for example, if you have an item that starts off as a sword in one game, that could be a cosmetic sword, that could be a utility driven sword. It could be a sword that has special, like aesthetics to it, which makes it, more special as a cosmetic versus it actually could be inflicting damage. It could be a sword that is used in a ceremony in a game and it's not used to actually kill a bad guy, but it's used to summon lightning to do a thing. And so understanding that at its core will then be critical in porting that over. Because, for example, if you're trying to go from like the Sword of a Thousand Truths in World of Warcraft to some sort of special weapon in Call of Duty, let's say, for example, just for ease of everybody knows what I'm talking about. How do you make that jump? Because it's not a one to one. They're different games and they're different like worlds and types of things. So instead of it being like a sword, you could understand it as like an offensive weapon, and then it could have certain characteristics, like maybe the gun could have a sword, part of a sword on it that you could have a special melee thing attached to it, or if it has like a lightning power and one thing, maybe it has like ultra fast reload or some other attributes that are kind of one way. So I guess like understanding the core thing of what is it and what's the actual value of it at the end of the day, it's probably really important. How are you guys thinking about that piece of it?
Yeah, good question. So the honest answer is all added attributes and kind of like added utility above aesthetics is a like that's a complete additional universe of like problems that you have to configure that for us from a strategic perspective that does not make sense to look into until we have initially figured out the aesthetic thing first properly. So I think if we can configure the aesthetic thing and the proper interoperability of aesthetic assets across like 10, 12 big gaming titles, and I'm talking like big gaming titles, not some indie thing, then we look at added attributes. Because if this works smoothly for the users and is actually a seamless experience, which unfortunately as of right now it is not yet, then you have a market, and once you have this market, and then you can consider yourself kind of an established player, then it's a lot easier to just add attributes on top of it and say, okay, and I totally understand where you're going. Like you have this golden sword, and this golden sword gives you 10 attack speed, whatever. And you have this helmet gives you defense, and then in this game it can also give you attack speed and defense. And then in this other game, like I don't know, Fortnite or PUBG or whatever, there's no attack and defense. It depends on like the items that you actually get in the game. So this will become an item with certain stats beyond aesthetics. Um, all of this is an added factor once you have the aesthetic thing figured out. Because if you have the aesthetic thing, that automatically means you have the working API, you have the seamless user experience, and you have the connectivity to the individual players in their ecosystems and to the gaming system. And then how you add the stats and in-game utility is just something that you have to configure with the gaming studios on top of that. But then you already have them in a place where okay, there's something working. So
And
this
then you
is
could
this
just
is something that yeah.
yeah, you could switch the zeros and ones. Once you have that in place, I guess what you're saying is it would have necessitated getting all the other infrastructure in place to where you can then easily manipulate the characteristics of what that actually does for people in game. once you've gotten to the point of having the aesthetically, represented thing, attach, messing around with the metadata or whatever else that you need to do, get the zeros and ones in place to have the effect that you want in game. That's easier to
Yeah,
do.
it's an easy thing to do on like the like visual effects is also an aesthetic thing that's not difficult, but then you have the connectivity in place and the tech in place to just add the utility like attack speed, whatever on top of it very easily. So the initial thing is really, I guess, if you want to rank the issues that we're solving, the cross chain thing is actually the easiest one. Then is the game engine and like 3D aesthetics, and then the last and maybe even bigger issue than 3D adjustability is bringing it into the user's profiles, because that's kind of like differentiating from game to game. And because the games also update their environments, you have to be on top of, okay, what the API can currently do for which game and what it can't do for what game, which also limits us a lot as an infrastructure player, because we're as a we've done some funding rounds, but we're still a startup in that sense. We can't go and talk to Epic Games, right? We can only kind of like see how can we get or brute force our way into these games with the current kind of like options that they allow. With some indie studios and Web3 games, we talk to them directly. They use our API, and we kind of like do it from scratch properly in terms of infrastructure for their games. But they're like, some of them are post-launch, some of them pre-launch. They have, I don't know, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people per month playing them. And then out of those, who are the ones that you can get for interoperability? They're just like a lot less in quantity of users. And where you want to go is obviously the big titles and like where you have millions of users a month, and also more of the revenues on the aesthetical side. And this is where we kind of like have to like force our way into it.
And how open do you think the Web 2 gaming community is to having Web 3 assets, even if designed in their style of game engine and what the style of the game looks like? How open are they to bringing sort of Web 3 and its intellectual property into the Web 2 world? I don't know if you could talk about that.
Not much. That's one of the issues. So we're trying to like do several things at once. When it comes to the aesthetic interoperability, we allow people to bring their Web3 IP into these games through basically NFTs to 3D mechanisms, similar to what we've done for the Neo Tokyo community with the activation page, where you can take, okay, the 2D asset becomes 3D. You have a couple of words to choose from where it works already, and then you can get this 3D asset in this world. So we have the NFT to 3D, then we have the 2D to 3D, and then what I would say, or how do I put this? We've put some horses in the race for text to 3D, for people to be able to completely personalize or individualize their 3D assets based on their ideas and kind of like their creative freedom. And we have had more users doing this part of our protocol and this part of our service than we've had NFT to 3D. So I think this is something where a lot of opportunity sits, with people just being able to like have their complete creative like ideas. I don't know, text input, I don't know, Dune fighter from the movie, on a horse as a cool character, and give him like a flaming sword. I don't know, and then we create this for these people. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Generally speaking, the Web 2 and Web 3 games, it's very different. Some are open to it, and some have, the opportunity to, they encourage this, something like Nifty Island, Decentraland. Basically, the more like Web 3 native games, they encourage this. This is also the ones where we have the most straightforward API integrations, and the ones where we currently do it through modding are Fortnite and GTA, and then you have it in these Web 2 games where you can play and use the avatars. But to be honest, there's no official opinion of this from the game developers as into how they think about this. It's kind of like it's tolerated. This modding thing in Web 2, it's been around for years. It's tolerated. So obviously they don't hate it, otherwise they would have shut it down. But they also don't love it, because then they would have just opened it up for a creator economy to kind of like sit on top of these games. The gamble, of course, from our perspective, is that this will happen at some point. If I look at gaming as a whole and like the macro of where this is going, I think a lot of games, especially role play games and single player games, will always have enclosed and encapsulated ecosystems for their player base. But with multiplayer games and even competitive gaming, I can see a development to the creator economy. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen within the next 3 or 6 months. But eventually, some big titles will emerge with this open creator economy, and basically people like them allowing people to have outside IP sit on top of this, and potentially even having some kind of like marketplace sitting there where, third parties can come in and create stuff and sell it. And the idea is for us to be early enough that if this is the case, we have the community, the funding, the manpower, the APIs in place to attack this immediately.
That's really cool. I wanted to go back to something you said in the very beginning, that you had three failed companies and one small exit. A lot of the people in Neo Tokyo, and probably a lot of people listening here, a lot of them have entrepreneurs. Some of them are afraid to start their first venture. And I think, having a failed business, I've had multiple, I think is actually quite an accomplishment. And you learn so much. If you have a successful company, obviously you learn, but I think you learn so much more with a failed opportunity, and how you can change it and what those steps are. I was wondering if you could sort of give some advice on learning, going out there, not being afraid to start your first company, even if it fails. That's great. What are some of the sort of lessons that you learned from that, and what can you share about those?
I mean, dude, so much. I mean, if you've done this a couple of times, starting companies, even in different, so mine have been in different industries, and really depending on kind of like what part you want to talk about, you have a story to tell, whether it's a story about like HR and hiring, whether it's a story about funding. Like, you learn so much along this way. I think when it comes to this thing that you said with, people potentially being afraid of starting a business, I understand that there's a general like, uncertainty for people to, should I do it or should I not? But I have never felt this scaredness for some reason, and a lot of the founders I know also haven't. I would argue that from what I've seen, founders, regardless of whether they're like super successful, medium successful, big exit, small exit, or no exits, I don't think they think like there's something a little bit wrong with us founders. Like, we don't think in terms of like, you know, scaring, like being like, what the fuck is gonna happen at the end of the day? Like, you live 80 years on this planet, right? The last 10 years you don't know what to do. The first 20 years you don't know what to do. So you have maybe 50 years. A lot of people get sick, shit happens. Maybe you have 30 good years on this earth. Like, you're gonna do something, like either you work somewhere or you do something yourself. My point is that if you do something yourself and you fail, you can still go back to working at a corp. So for me, it never really make like, what are you afraid of? What's the worst that, like, literally what's the absolute worst that could happen? The absolute worst that's gonna happen is you do something, it doesn't work, and then you're still where you left off before. Arguably, you're even in a better place because you've gained experience as a like a career wise experience, or you've gained experience in an industry. I don't know. I'm not sure if I answered this question in a very helpful way, but yeah, there's like I don't think there's anything to be afraid of. And if you're really like that afraid, then maybe this is the first sign that it's not for you. And I know this might sound harsh, but if you're already scared of like maybe quitting your job and trying something like being out there by yourself, and if this is already scary, then everything that comes after is going to be like even more scary. So maybe maybe reconsider already.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like finding that extra payroll, figuring out how to get in contact with the people you need to, and getting the playbook of what is the next step. That is way scarier than taking that very first step to, quitting your
Yeah.
job and going out on your own. No, I 100% agree on that. I mean, we
I've
started a restaurant in the middle of the pandemic, and that didn't fail. I mean, that failed, that didn't work, and it's always one of those things where you never know unless you try. And,
yeah.
to me, it's always exciting to do it. I 100% agree. And I've talked to a lot of people who are, ask me for advice to start companies. And they're always like, well, should I do this? And there's always that trepidation of, but anyway, definitely take that first step. Keep your job if you need to and do it as a side hustle for now. I mean, that's always what I tell people and see how it goes.
Yeah.
Now, to fully
Yeah.
get it done, in my opinion, you have to take that step. But no, that's great, and
For sure.
I think you can learn a lot from that. But we can bring it back now. I wanted to get that
No,
information.
but
I wanted to.
this is exactly my point. Like you did something, it didn't work out. You're still here. You're still breathing. Like life goes on.
I survived.
Even if it fails and you're left with, I don't know, 20, 30K or whatever in debt, that's numbers on paper on, at one bank. It's not even every bank. It's maybe one bank. So like, I don't know.
Yeah, whatever people ask me about starting a business or anything related to that, I just send them that Dark Kermit meme that says "Do it," like do it. That's always my answer, and it usually gets people into the right direction. Just jumping into it.
Now a word from our sponsors.
Introducing Creo Engine, a next-level Web3 gaming ecosystem that connects gamers and developers in a Web3 gaming hub. Hop on their Creo Play platform to check out current and upcoming titles like Evermore Nights, Slime Haven, Creonia Metaverse, and Arcade Fest. The team has earned the endorsement of the chairman of Indonesia's People Consultative Assembly and earned a 10 out of 10 from Hackin on their cross-chain bridge audit. Check all this out and more on CreoEngine.com. Introducing Ridotto, gambling infrastructure that offers seamless on-chain experiences. I'm excited to announce that Ridotto is the first real GambleFi project to be listed on not just one, but two major centralized exchanges, Bitmart and MEXC. Hop on their fully decentralized platform for lotteries, casino games, and betting. No KYC, no deposits, and instant payouts. All fueled by their RDT token, enabling you to play, build your own casino games, and bankroll as the house. Check all this out and more at Ridotto.io.
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
We should definitely always be thinking about life advice in terms of Dark Kermit. It's really one of those secret life hacks.
And I think most of the founders that I've spoken to, or let me think real quick. The majority of them, definitely the good ones, have this calling that you're just describing with the frog telling them to just do it. Like a couple of business angels that have invested in this company and another one before that I had, when I talked to them, and they were like what I would consider successful entrepreneurs with like 9-digit exits, they really would say something along those lines of, okay, there's like you need to do this, and there's really no other option than doing it, which would be the bad Kermit, I think.
Or is he the good Kermit? You never know.
Yeah, one of the frogs, one of the frogs. Yeah, we all have mental frogs telling us we should do it.
This is the new meme coin, the Dark Hermit meme coin. It's gonna go places. But the whole point of the meme is to just encourage people to go after their dreams, in a funny way. That could be good. Memes for good. Anyways, I want to circle back. Um, I want to talk about how with you guys what you're doing with style, how is well, obviously the Web3 element is critical on the product side, but you guys do have other Web3 elements as far as your actual business and how people can engage with it and kind of bet on different parts of the ecosystem. Maybe kind of talk about that a little bit and just all about how the Web3 elements interplay within your actual ecosystem.
Yeah, we're actually enhancing this as we speak currently. The way I approach this, and what I've always had my team kind of like guided in the direction, which in hindsight wasn't great, but it is the way it is now, was we built a protocol or some kind of service running through a protocol that is the solution to a problem. And then we have a utility token on top of it running in this ecosystem. And I don't want to go into the whole detail now on what the token does. It's a typical like utility token. You use it in the protocol. It's also rewarding for some participants. You can use it to participate in voting and like continuous construction and growing of the protocol, whatever. Where I'm going with this is my thought process was always, okay, if you build a product, there's a service, there's a utility that people need in the gaming space, and then you put the token on top of it, and then people will understand this is something that makes sense. They're gonna get behind it. Boy, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Very, very wrong. We learned the hard way that just by doing this, people do not care enough. And they, unfortunately, and I to this day don't think it's sustainable. The things that work in this space are the things where people think if they participate, they can make more money on top, which in very, very rare cases can function sustainably. In most of the cases, isn't. And I think this goes for a lot of things that are live right now. Not everything. A lot of great projects out there, whether it's NFT projects, whether it's protocols with fundamental application, like I don't know, XRP for example, Bitcoin, Ethereum, the basics. But oh gosh, I'm ranting out here. Where am I going with this? For us, we found that we didn't really get a lot of traction, and I think the traction from a marketing and just like market awareness perspective is still one that we lack the most for some reason. And unfortunately, we're still struggling with this, and I don't 100% know like what our problem is, because this is what keeps me up at night. If I knew what our problem was, I'd try to solve it. I think we do a lot of things really, really well. And going back to what I said before, I always pushed my team in the direction of, okay, let's just build a good product. Because I was thinking from Web2 perspective, if you build a good product, people will pick up and use it. And in Web3, unfortunately, and in crypto, people need that like community and hype element on top of it. It's like this, like, herd mentality. Oh, we're going to like go to the moon and make money with this. And this is something that, and this is my fault as a founder, we did not put enough attention to in building this ecosystem, but we focused all on the product and on the solution. And now we're left with a product and something that works and something that is appreciated by selected people in the industry, such as the Neo Tokyo citizen community. I think we've, with LeBoomington, we've I don't know, done 30 upwards, and if maybe not that much, maybe like 20, 25 citizen assets for different virtual environments, and they see the use case and the utility of this, of having this 3D asset and then being able to use it in the future. We've done it for a couple of individual Bored Ape holders, Pudgy Penguins, but we're not yet at scale seeing the like attention from regular crypto users, because it's maybe still too niche, or it's not that big of a problem enough for them. There could be multiple reasons. Which is why, and I've turned this into a really long story, as you asked for, which is why we're now starting to push for more elements into our ecosystem that have this, dare I say it? No, I won't say this, but that have a little bit more of a let's all make money element to it. And because I'm very disregarding of other projects that have 100% Ponzi elements, I wanted to make sure we don't go for something like this that's just like, okay, we're printing and printing and printing, which ironically works really well. And most of the projects that do this end up making the most money, which is very frustrating. But we're doing some things where, and I'll tell you what it is in a second, where we allow people to potentially make money on top of our ecosystem with it still having a sustainable element. So the way we thought about this is coming up with our own in-house IP on top of the existing protocol. Because what we've did was, okay, we built this protocol for infrastructure for different worlds, and we do 3D assets for all of these worlds. It doesn't work perfectly yet for all the worlds, but it does work for some. We have done a lot of 3D assets. You can use them in gaming, but we're not getting the attention. So we're thinking, okay, so maybe people don't yet have this need to take their assets in different worlds. Maybe they don't have the creativity, but we see a lot of things in this space working where people jump on kind of like hype trains of other people's IP and they just end up making IP only. And I'm not throwing any names out there, but there's some very, very OG old collections that come up with this IP and they never do anything with it. And it's just like, okay, we have this IP. So we thought, okay, we can do this, but we can actually add utility on top of it. So we're launching, and this is super alpha because we're only announcing this next week. We're doing our like own IP of, we call them sulfurions, and it's like a species of kind of like bounty hunter space cowboys. It's kind of like a crossover of Borderlands, the game, where you have this like wasteland and like, I don't know, kind of like mentally ill people, but then you have this like cowboy aesthetic on top of it, but then also like, you know, sci-fi elements. And with this, we're doing a collection of characters. We're building a storyline, and we're gonna have these characters be, you know, our own intellectual property, but usable in different games. So we're doing all of these avatars, and from scratch, we're making the NFT collection be usable in different virtual worlds, so that you actually have this like in-game utility on top of it. And then here's the cool thing: we already have a next collection planned on top of this, and because we can now embed those collections and those 3D assets from scratch into the infrastructure that we've developed, we can actually go ahead and have those added attributes that we've discussed earlier, like attack speed or defense, embedded into the NFTs and actually usable in the different games that we put them into. And this is kind of what we want to build now on top of the infrastructure. And we're hoping that with a little bit of a different setup and a little bit more focus on the marketability of this, we'll ultimately also get more traction on the main infrastructure protocol itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really exciting. What gave you the idea
Well,
to
let's
use
see.
the cowboy type theme? I think that's really cool. What gave you that idea as far as coming up with that?
I don't know if we had a specific kicker for it. I've played Borderlands many years ago. We just kind of came together as a team and we said, okay, like what do we see out there working? What we think is cool. And this is just going to be our first IP line. Basically, the idea is to become kind of a 3D asset publisher and run more IPs after this. So this is going to be the first line, and then we do something other afterwards, which is completely different. Maybe it's, I don't know, wizards or orcs or I don't know, elves or whatnot. And this kind of allows us to, like, you know, push these assets into the different game studios that we work with. And for this particular one, I don't know. I think the team kind of came together and we looked at things that we see right now on the market and we thought, okay, what we think what would be cool, what is maybe a little bit different. We saw a lot of like stuff working in this um a lot of things with like an Asian touch. I can't say whether I don't know Korean, Japanese, or Chinese, but a lot of things within like I don't know Azuki's. Bowser, this NFT creator, had this Shinjuku Juki. I don't know Asian, sci-fi elements. Neo Tokyo Asian, I guess to some degree. With the sci-fi elements that's working. And then you have a lot of just like comical stuff. You have a lot of like I don't know bored apes. You have some cute stuff like pudgies, and I don't know for some reason I have yet to see some wasteland cowboy thing that's like really doing well. And we thought, okay, maybe this is some kind of uh like route we can go down, but we didn't just want to do like cowboys. That seemed lame. So we wanted to add like this whole story about like them being off world in a sci-fi situation because this is still what's very very marketable in Web3, and this is kind of like how it all came together. And then also some people from our team they play League, and there's the skin from I think is Jin. Jin has there's actually it's a series. It's a High Noon skin series on League of Legends. You have High Noon Jinx. I think there's Jin. Anyhow, Jin is like a sharpshooter character from League of Legends, and he has this one skin where he's like High Noon, kind of like a wasteland cowboy, and this is kind of like the aesthetic that we wanted to go down. And then we saw the artwork for the skin, and we were like, okay, this is cool. This is going to be kind of like direction.
I want to reshift the conversation a little bit, and I want to scope out more to kind of what you're seeing in the market generally. I'm not as concerned with price targets or that on that side, but more so of where do you think we are in terms of actual development of really high quality assets, and where we are with actually building projects that are going to onboard the masses of people, right? Because I think you have a really interesting perspective in that you're really working with a bunch of other projects and helping to support them. So you're kind of like B2B in a way. And so you probably have a really interesting vantage point on kind of where people are in their building process.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think what to say, what not to say, what a smart thing to say would be. I think one of the problems that I see in the industry right now with all kinds of projects is that they're very much focused on themselves right now, and it's from it doesn't matter if you're building some kind of like DeFi wallet custodian. Of course, I see most of the stuff in Web3 gaming. Everyone's kind of focused on themselves, which is normal. It's a competitive market. But I think the problem with this, I think the problem stems from the fact that there's not a lot of, on a grand scheme of things, there's not a lot of liquidity in the market. And most of the liquidity is currently going from A to B to C, and it's the same people like going from island to island and in circles. I would argue that like 50-60% of like the last IDOs on different launch pads and different Web3 games that have launched tokens is the same kind of people investing in this and maybe selling one, going to another, or keeping their money there and going to another. Everyone's kind of like fighting for the same people in this market, which makes it very difficult because we're all kind of like fighting over the same pie. And funding, yes, there's funding in the market, yes, there's VCs, all this exists, but on a macro level, it's still like very small access to capital compared to like other like established industries. So I would say on average, the games that are launching, and I can speak for this the best because this is what we're watching. On average, the games do not have the actual funding that they would need to build a proper game. So a lot of them are like bootstrapping, they're hustling, trying to get it out there, which means that they need to make more money through the token or through their community that they're launching into as a logical result. Which means, as a next logical result, that they prioritize potentially unhealthy like tokenomics or company development to make short-term money to then finance the development of the game further, which from their perspective is totally fine and the logical thing to do, but in a grand scheme, unhealthy for the market again, because you end up with this situation where like, okay, we need to make 1.5 or 2 or 3 million at our token launch in order to keep developing our project and to nurture the user base and community. So they launch at potentially too high valuations. Currently, if you look at tokens in the market, they're all valued, in my opinion, relatively high, with very little active token circulation. And then you ending up with a project that has, I don't know, maybe an FDV of like 60, 70 million or more. I've seen some with a few hundred million of fully diluted valuation, but only 5 or 6 or 7% of the token in active circulation, which I think is a very unhealthy starting point, because you know that there's so much still to circulate, and like, where is that gonna go from here? And I'm not saying that we did our thing any like better, but I would argue that what we did was a lot more sustainable and a lot more down to earth of an actual realistic company valuation, which maybe in hindsight was a bad thing. I don't know. That's not what we need to talk about now. But this is one of the problems that I'm seeing, and this is something that I find a little bit unsustainable. But you can't really blame anyone for it, because as a outline, it's kind of like a circle. And I think the big issue is that on a macro level, there's not enough attention in the space in total yet. And just touching base upon one quick thing that you said with regards to what the issue is user acquisition. I agree. We just don't have enough general people in this ecosystem that like want to go into like there. As of right now, there's not a lot of new people coming into crypto, even though we've had this Bitcoin all-time high and everyone was saying, oh, after the halving, May it's going to go skyrocket. We actually haven't seen a lot. Like in the last cycle, you saw then new money coming in, new liquidity, and that's why all the altcoins are pumping. You don't see this now. We're the same people. Maybe like very slowly we're getting more people in the space, and I don't have the magic solution that everyone's looking for. I think gaming has the potential to become this place where people are onboarded in mass, but there has yet to be this like one title that comes. And I think in order for this one title to come, they will have to have either an insane sticky product or a lot of money to market their product. And I think it's going to be the later one. There's a lot of competition in gaming, and building sticky product requires, I don't know, a lot. I don't have the history on the current like world titles. I don't know about like Fortnite or I don't know, Dota or League of Legends, all of those games that like, or Call of Duty, that they fill stadiums on like an esports level. I'm not sure if this was always the way. I don't have an opinion on whether this was because the game was super sticky. Probably that was the big reason, but I would also argue that they had capital to on top market this, and this is something that Web3 games don't have. So yeah, we only have the way of stickiness to get people in this industry, and I'm hoping that we'll find something, or the financial applications. I think at the end of the day, blockchain is still like the best use case for just financial applications, but it has to be financial applications in use for payment and not to make money. I think the narrative of making money and it's not good.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense. If you're coming out with a token and the hype is what's building up the token, then you've got the money to start your project. The problem is the hype isn't there because the project takes such a long amount of time. The hype has moved on to other projects. So, to me, it makes a lot more sense. And, the problem is the funding, right? You have to have the money first to build the product before you come out. So that's sort of the chicken or the egg, I think, issue with a lot of people in Web3. But if you have that product ready to go and then you launch the token sort of simultaneously with that, and I think we're going to see a lot more of those types of projects going forward.
I think the games that are doing it well and the games that have performed well, I don't know, like this Neon thing has performed well. There's 2 or 3 other games that did well, and from when I compared them, all of them had passed funding before they launched a token. I think this is important. If you launch a token as means of funding, this would mean that you haven't had developed anything beforehand, and then you're in this speculation, kind of like rabbit, or how do you call it? Hamster wheel. And this is not good.
So, Leo, we're coming up to the time. We have about 2 minutes left. Just kind of want to hand the mic back over to you and ask, is there anything that you think is important that we didn't talk about, or any sort of random out of left field life alpha that you'd like to, share with the audience? Just want to thank you very much for coming on the show today and kind of give you the mic back and the platform to just get a message out to the people.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think we've touched base on a lot of things. I could ramble a bit about our projects, what we're building, the issues we're facing, kind of like what I'm seeing in the market in general. I think the Neo community has been kind of like supportive. We've had the relation for a while now. As I said before, we've done the assets. There's not really any like major ask I have. I've kind of like teased a little bit on what we're going to be building from now on. But I'm not the type of guy to ask you to like go get in on this or anything. We are what we are. We do what we do. We've always put building good functioning products over hype, and I think ultimately this is what's gonna, you have to practice what you preach. I can't be out here saying everyone's like, doing bullshit and then do the same bullshit. So we have to come with proper utility and, a sustainable approach. And this is what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you, Leo. Thank you so much for coming on today. And Jared, Hogsheadcheese, appreciate you for co-hosting. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of Interlinked. Appreciate you guys.